Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. In today's webinar, we will be covering the topic Hypertension Guidelines, Critical Analysis 2020 by Dr. Sadanand Shetty. We also have Dr. Milind Phadke as moderator for this webinar. Coming to Dr. Sadanand Shetty doesn't need any introduction. He is an emeritus professor, Dr. D.Y. Patil University School of Medicine, Mumbai. Dr. Shetty heads the Department of Cardiology, Somaya Super Specialty Institute, Mumbai. He's also Chief Medical Director for Sadanand Healthy Living Center Limited, Mumbai, and also the founder of Sadanand G2S2 Foundation. Dr. Sadanand is also the editor-in-chief India for Cleveland Hall of Fame for Biography and Patient Education book, and also founder of CVD India CAA International. Welcome, Dr. Sadanand. Dr. Milind Phadke, our moderator for today's session, he's a consultant interventional cardiologist. Dr. Milind is also an associate professor in cardiology at LTM Medical College and LTMG Hospital, Mumbai. Dr. Milind is a gold medalist in DM cardiology from GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. And he has close to 38 peer-reviewed journals and 6 book chapters to his name. Welcome, Dr. Milind. There are a couple of instructions for the attendees. We request all the attendees to be with good internet connectivity to have a seamless experience. By default, all the attendees will be on mute and in listen-only mode. In case the attendees have any questions, they can use the Q&A session, which is available, or else they can also use the chat to type in their questions. Now, without any further ado, I invite Dr. Sadanand to speak to start the evening session.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome, friends, for this webinar organized by White Coat. And I'm just sharing my screen. You can see my screen. All of you can see. Milind and Jason, you can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do for next 30 minutes or so is to give you the critical review of hypertension guidelines, what we would like to know in 2020. We know that there is a high prevalence and poor BP control across India. And if you look at this particular slide, on the left side, slide shows hypertension, awareness, treatment, and control at urban and the rural locations. And on the right, you see the same thing at different study sites, like different states of India. If you look at the prevalence in 2017, the prevalence of hypertension in India is 30.7. That means almost every 3 individuals, 1 is hypertensive. This is the data of 2017. Maybe now it may be a little more than that. And in years to come, it will be definitely more. And if you look at this slide, now if you look at the urban and the rural difference in all these 3 things, that is awareness, treatment, and the control, there is a significant difference. If you see here, the urban is about 15.4 versus the rural is about 9.3. So also if you look at the different states in India, like at Chandigarh as well as in Jaipur, the control rate is less than against Chennai, Bangalore, or Trivandrum. So we have a heterogeneity of awareness and the control in the urban and the rural population. So also in the different states of India. What are the different special features of hypertension in India as against the Western counterpart? Onset early in the life, rural-urban divide in prevalence, which I mentioned in my previous slide. There is a clustering of multiple cardiovascular risk factors in a patient of hypertension, significant seasonal variation of the blood pressure, and there is a rising average blood pressure of the general population, and more importantly, low awareness and low treatment and the control rates, as I showed in my previous slide. and there is early hypertension mediated organ dysfunction, possibly due to poor control. So here we are talking about the cumulative risk of hypertension. When hypertension is long-standing and not treated, by the time we see a patient of hypertension, we already have got hypertension mediated organ dysfunction, and therefore it is important for us to recognize hypertension in time and also to create an awareness. Now let us look at one study called as a SIDE study, which is a screening India's twin epidemic, that is both hypertension and diabetes together. And this is called double trouble, which basically tells us that what is the prevalence of both hypertension and diabetes in population. If you look at this particular data, it is around 21% in India. That means 1 in 5 patients have got both hypertension and diabetes in the population. Now let us also look at what about the lipid abnormality and blood pressure, hypertension patient. There is a rising epidemic in the newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes. If you look at the various, clinical indicator along with the hypertension, dyslipidemia, isolated hypertension, isolated dyslipidemia. In a patient of a hypertension, nearly 42.4% people have associated lipid abnormality, and that particular word coined as lipitension. That means the lipid abnormality and the hypertension. And this lipitension is a rising epidemic in newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes, adults of type 2 diabetes. And in a patient with a background of diabetes, this requires careful attention to reduce cardiovascular events. So uncontrolled high blood pressure leads to increased cardiovascular mortality. If you look at the meta-analysis of almost 61 prospective observation study, almost more than 10 lakh adults between 40 to 69, and the starting blood pressure more than 115/75. And if you look at the increase in the BP, and you see the increase in the cardiovascular risk. Now, if you look at blood pressure at 115/75, and when the blood pressure goes by 20/10 more, that means when it goes to 135/85, it becomes twofold. That means the cardiovascular mortality. When it doubles further 20/10, it becomes fourfold. And if it increases another 20/10 from the previous one, you have eightfold. So there is a sort of, the increased mortality, and that doubles with each increase of 20 systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Like when it is 115, it is one-fold, and when it is 175, 105, it is eightfold. So that is the magnitude of the blood pressure problem. So now let us look at the topic what we are going to discuss today. What does the new guideline tell us about the hypertension management or hypertension diagnosis? There are principal areas of agreement in various guidelines. So these are the 4 areas where there is no disagreement between all the guidelines what we are going to discuss. What are they? One is the emphasis on accuracy of BP measurement. Second thing is the cardiovascular risk assessment to determine BP treatment thresholds, lifestyle modification recommendation, initial combination therapy. So these 4 subjects or areas where there is no disagreement between various guidelines. However, now let us talk about the differences in the approach in these 4 headings in all various guidelines, like the classification, threshold for treatment initiation, what is the treatment goal, and what is the treatment strategy. So let us now come to the classification. When you look at the classification of hypertension, on the left side, you see the European Society of Cardiology, European Society of Hypertension 2018, and the Indian Guideline on Hypertension. This is the last one, that is 2019, as against the HACC, which came about 3 years ago, and the Global International Society of Hypertension, which came in May 2020. If you look at the recommendation, the class and level of recommendation, etc. Now in these 2, like Indian as well as the ESC, the hypertension is classified into 3 grades. Whereas if you look at the ASA, ACC, it is like a stage 1 or a stage 2 hypertension. If you see the class 1 year recommendation, level of C, which is expert opinion, as against in case of A and global, it is a non-randomized B, and this is the level of evidence for this type of, for this particular classification. What does exactly these two guidelines differs as far as the category of blood pressure measures? Normal blood pressure category is same in both the guidelines, whether European or the American. However, the European guideline categorize the grade 1 hypertension when systolic blood pressure equal to or more than 140 to 159 and the diastolic between 90 to 100, while the AHA-ACC categorize stage 1 hypertension when blood pressure is between 130 to 139, the diastolic 80 to 89. So basically the stage 1 of American guideline tells systolic blood pressure between 130 to 139 and the diastolic 80 to 89, whereas the grade 1 of European is 140 to 159 and the diastolic is 90 to 99. Now, if you look at the ISH global hypertension, which came in May 2020, more or less, it has, like a grading of hypertension, and this is almost similar to the European one. There's a grade 1, 140 to 150, and 90 to 99 diastolic, and more than or equal to 160, and more than equal to 100 is a grade 2. Whereas in case of European, there are 3 grades, whereas in global ISH guideline, it is only 2 grades. If you look at the Indian guideline on hypertension, that also more or less gone according to the European guideline. That means the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then the isolated again 140 to 159 and more than 160 systolic and the diastolic less than 90. So Indian guideline have gone more into European guideline. Now, if you look at the clinic blood pressure, and there's a difference between the ambulatory and the home BP level, both in ESC as well as EHA. There's EHA 2017 and the ESC 2018. The ambulatory blood pressure, whatever systolic and diastolic readings are the same. That means the daytime mean of equal to more than 135, diastolic equal to more than 85. And if you see the 24-hour mean, it is equal to or more than 130 and the diastole equal to more than 80. And the home BP 135 by 85 is the, above that is a category for hypertension. And if you see the age, also more or less ambulatory BP readings are the same as like ESC. If you look at the Hypertension Canada, which essentially gives us classification, when you see a very elevated blood pressure in the office or home or in pharmacy, if it is very high, the reading is more than or equal to 180, 110, it is hypertension. If the blood pressure reading, if there is no diabetes, whether it is done automated or non-automated, if the reading automated is equal to more than 135, 85 or non-automated is more than equal to 140, 90, then it is hypertension. And if it is not hypertension. And then we have to do out of office measurement, that is at home, or you do the ambulatory BP and rule out white coat hypertension. So basically, when we see a patient of an individual with a high BP reading, we have to get into this sort of, whether it is a very high, then you straight away make a diagnosis. If it is not blood pressure for diabetes and non-diabetes, there is a little difference. And the difference between the office BP, automated and non-automated, and the difference of about 5 millimeter in systolic and 5 millimeter in diastolic. And whenever there is a discrepancy or a reading is, not, concurrent, then maybe doing the out of BP measurement like ambulatory or home BP monitoring is advised. So what is the summary of diagnosis of hypertension of where all these guidelines? If I had to give the diagnosis of hypertension summary, in the AHA-ACC guideline, hypertension diagnosis set as equal to more than 130 by 80, whereas 140 by 90 in the other guideline. Whereas high risk group, every guideline tells us that more than 130 by 80 is what we have to use for diagnosis. So in 2020, if I have to give a summary of diagnosis of hypertension, high risk group equal to more than 130/80, we have to consider for making a diagnosis of hypertension. Whereas if you go by ACC-AHA, again more than 130/80. Whereas if you are a follower of other guideline, like maybe Canada, maybe ACC or Indian guideline, or even the ISH global guideline of May 2020, wherein more than 140 to 90 is taken as the diagnosis of hypertension. Now let us go to the next point. What is the threshold for treatment initiation? We have diagnosed hypertension, but at what threshold we have to start the treatment? If you look at the blood pressure threshold for treatment initiation, both in the ESC and the AHA, which are more or less standard, the first thing is the lifestyle modification, which we know. Therapeutic lifestyle modification is the recommendation. Any high normal blood pressure or any grade of hypertension, any stage of hypertension. However, when it goes into grade 1, there is a consideration of pharmacotherapy, but there is a recommendation to start pharmacotherapy whenever patient comes with a very high risk category, like a cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, heart failure, etc. So, except for those situations, ESC gives us pharmacotherapy for grade 1, etc., beyond grade 1, whereas AHA gives us guideline again, 130/80 is the stage. If therapeutic lifestyle doesn't control the blood pressure, there is a provision to start the pharmacotherapy. So also hypertension, Canada also concur with that. Now coming to the Indian guideline on hypertension, the threshold point of view, as shown here, the coronary artery disease and heart failure, the threshold is 130/80. In all other situations, more than 140/90. Of course, very old, more than 80, 140 to 150/90 is taken as a cutoff. So if you have to simplify, 140/90 for everyone is a threshold to start treatment. But in a coronary artery disease, heart failure, 130/80 is the threshold for hypertension therapy. And then of course, so if you have to look at the summary of this BP threshold, cardiovascular risk factors should be considered while initiating treatment in hypertensive patients. So BP threshold for all the guidelines, that means European, American, Indian, Canada, as well as the global ISH of May 2020. In a high risk group, we have to start therapy at 130/80. And in a general population without risk factors, we can give probably lifestyle, the method. There is no provision to start pharmacotherapy. Now let us talk about the treatment goal. What is the difference among all the guidelines? If you have to look at the European versus the American guideline, in a person who is less than 65 years, European guideline tells us that the BP goal treatment is less than 130/80. Even the AHA tells us 130/80. And if it is more than 65, again 130 to 140/80. And if you see the AHA, it has generalized everyone as a simple formula that everyone's BP goal should be less than 130/80, as shown here. Whereas in European one, less than 65, there is a provision to reduce the blood pressure between 120 to 130 and diastolic 70 to 80. Here I would like to give a point that European guidelines says not to get the systolic less than 120 and the diastolic not less than 70. So they're given as a cutoff, systolic not less than 120 and the diastolic not less than 70. So hypertension guidelines in the US and the Canada basically depends upon is there any indication of clinical cardiovascular disease or high cardiovascular disease risk, wherein 10-year atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk is equal to more than 10, then get the blood pressure less than 130/80. Otherwise, it is all more or less the same as I showed in my previous slide. Blood pressure level threshold for treatment and the target to be achieved, the Indian guideline also gives us more or less the same parameter, that if patient has a coronary artery disease, heart failure, or high atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, it is 120 to 130 and 70 to 80. Not less than 120, not less than 70. Whereas the patient has a low cardiovascular risk, then maybe 130 to 40 and maybe 70 to 80 is recommended. Whereas the global hypertension guideline, which came in May 2020, again gives us a target BP reduction, at least, by 2010, ideally to less than 140/90, and aim to control the blood pressure within about 3 months, that you should, get the blood pressure less than 65 years, target 130/80, and if tolerated, between 120/70, more than that, not less than this, as shown by the European guideline. And in elderly people, 140 to 90 is fine. But again, we have to individualize depending upon the tolerability. Any patient, when you are treating old patient in particular, you have to see what blood pressure patient tolerates rather than a figure of 130/80. So now let us come to the summary of what blood pressure target of all these guidelines. If I have to summarize, cardiovascular risk factor and the age should be considered while targeting the blood pressure. BP target should be 140/90 for a general population and less than 130/80 for high risk or established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or heart failure patient. So it is very clear as far as all the different guidelines. Now let us talk about the treatment strategy. Treatment strategy again more or less is the same, like with the first drug, always the ACE inhibitor ARB, and if required we can add to the CCB or a small dose of diuretic like chlorthalidone or indapamide. If one or two drug doesn't control, then we can go into triple. And when resistant hypertension is there is a role to use drug like spironolactone or eplerenone, and beta blocker in a select indication when there is the post-MI patient or a young hypertensive patient or a patient or a woman who is planning a pregnancy, then beta blocker may be a drug. We know that ACE inhibitor, ARBs are totally contraindicated. So also the AHA also recommends the drug treatment wise more or less the same therapy as even in Canada 2020 as well as 2020 tells us that drug treatment is recommended after the therapeutic lifestyle, whether a single drug or a multiple the 2 drugs or a 3 drug. It all depends upon the indication. If you have to get the systolic blood pressure less than 20 and the diastolic blood pressure less than 10, then possibly there is a role for combination therapy upfront. And a single pill combination should be considered to improve the patient efficacy, efficiency, and the tolerability. So ideally, single pill combination therapy is one of the recommended therapy now, and that is what we have to follow in 2020, that as far as possible, combination of therapy is ideal to improve the efficacy, efficiency, and the tolerability and for the adherence of the therapy. Indian guideline on hypertension again gives us all these 5 groups of drugs for use in hypertension, like ACE inhibitor, ARB, calcium channel blockers, diuretic. I would recommend chlorthalidone or indapamide. I don't think we should use any more thiazide diuretics. And then the newer blocker. We have got a lot of newer blocker like nebuliol like drugs, particularly in a younger individual with a sympathetic overactivity. There is a strong role for India, the use of beta blocker, particularly after the India Heart study. We have recently, we were part of that study where the Indian Heart study, almost amounting to 20,000 patient study, data suggests us that we have a high increased sympathetic the activity by our basal heart rate is always about 80 plus, and also our blood pressure, particularly evening time, it is more. So there is an indication of using beta blocker, particularly newer beta blocker like a nebuliol. And as the other guideline, Indian guideline also tells us that we have to use a combination therapy. So let us come to the treatment strategy about and the summary of all the guidelines put together. Now, 5 classes of drugs can be recommended as the first line, that is ACE inhibitor, angiotensin receptor blocker, calcium channel blocker, diuretics particularly like indapamide or chlorthalidone. I would not recommend hydrochlorothiazide in 2020, at least in Indian subset, because now chlorthalidone and indapamide is freely available to us, and the newer beta blocker like drug like nebivolol, etc. There is a place for using newer beta blocker upfront as the first drug in young hypertensive, particularly with the tachycardia, lot of sympathetic overactivity. Combination therapy with a different class of drug, different mechanism of action can achieve effect control of blood pressure with a minimum side effects. And that is why we have to see that the combination is the way forward in 2020, maybe double drug combination or a triple drug combination. And we in India are fortunate that we have easy availability of all these various combination of 2 drug or a 3 drug in a various dosages. So it becomes very easy for the adherence of the patient therapy. Younger individuals, we know that high renin hypertension, lot of sympathetic overactivity. Like elderly people are more into low renin hypertension. So in a patient elderly, we use diuretic and CCB, calcium channel blocker, whereas young individual have high renin hypertension, and therefore we are using newer beta blocker or maybe the conventional beta blocker with beta 1 selectivity, and also the ACE inhibitor ARB, because they also work on high renin hypertension. Either single or in a combination is a way forward. Whereas in elderly, as I mentioned, diuretic or CCB are the first line of agent. So let us see how they are divergent in maybe the threshold and the diagnosis, but how they are convergent into whatever treatment goal. Now, if you have to look at the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association guideline regarding definition, more than 130/80 is hypertension. European guideline definition, that is more than 140/90 is hypertension. So hypertension is defined with the BP of 140/90 in European, more than 130/80 in American, more than 149/90 in Indian, more than 140/90 in Canadian. But when it comes to the blood pressure goal, more or less 130/80 is the treatment at goal. And I personally feel, looking at Indian the data, the prevalence of the hypertension in India, and as I showed what are the special feature of hypertension in India, lot of people with diabetes coexisting, lipid abnormality coexisting, young hypertensive, we see quite a number of patients. And to prevent the cumulative effect of blood pressure long term, we have to catch them at early stage. And I would consider maybe keeping this goal for defining and getting the blood pressure less than 130/80, in particular in a patient of a heart failure or a coronary artery disease, even getting down to 120 systolic, maybe 70 to 80 diastolic is the way forward for us in 2020. So there is more agreement between the guideline than major differences. So whatever guideline you are following regarding the therapy and the goal, there is a convergent opinion. So we need not have to worry. All guidelines strongly recommend lowering the blood pressure target for high-risk patient is the first requirement. So high-risk patient, whatever be the guideline, get the blood pressure less than 130/80 or even between 120 to 130, 70 to 80. And also emphasis on a proper BP measurement. I would like to spend little time here, because in hypertension, everything depends upon the proper measurement of blood pressure. Whenever we have a doubt of blood pressure measurement, like there is an indication of a white coat or mask hypertension, there is always a possibility to do the blood pressure measurement with an automated machine in the office or at home. And also selectively ambulatory BP monitoring we may have to do, because we make a diagnosis and confirmation of hypertension only on blood pressure measurement reading. So hypertension is one disease where everything revolves around the correct BP measurement. So we have to spend enough to see that you don't do a wrong diagnosis. So therefore, it's very important for us to have a laboratory and a diagnostic testing. Also, the lifestyle and behavioral changes are very important. Therapeutic lifestyle is a part and parcel of hypertensive treatment, right from the high normal to all grades or stages of hypertension. And also pharmacological treatment, depending upon which stage, what combination, double, single drug, double drug, or a triple drug. The newer lower threshold to diagnose and treating hypertension are very, very relevant to India, as I mentioned earlier, because we have high risk population, including patients with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So I would consider, as I said earlier, 130 by high risk individual in large majority of our patient is a goal of or a threshold for hypertension we have to keep, and otherwise in a low risk population, maybe more than 140/90 in the community, we can keep as a logical threshold to diagnose and treat hypertension. However, most importantly, aggressive blood pressure goal, may be difficult to achieve in all Indians, but we have to create an awareness, and therefore it is, for us clinicians, physicians who are treating hypertensive patients, and we have to spread the awareness of, creating awareness of hypertension diagnosis in the medical community and in general public. And we must make, the concerted efforts to embrace this recommendation so that our patients get the benefit. With this, I would like to end my presentation, and maybe we can now go to the question answer session. I would hand over the mic to Jason and maybe Milind. You can hear Milind?
Yeah.
Can we have the slide, our full, this one, Jason? We can all see in one slide. Yeah.
Dr. Milan, you want to share the questions, or you want me to do it, sir?
No, I think there are a lot of questions which have come up, and some of the representative questions, because it's very difficult to answer everything.
Yeah.
Some questions which are recurring and which are clinically important. So I'll post some of them to Shetty sir, and then maybe we can have a discussion.
Yeah.
One question, sir, which is coming again and again is that in the COVID era, how do we alter our antihypertensive therapy and patients with ACE inhibitors and ARBs? Do we stop them? Do we continue them? Do we start them in a patient who has COVID? Who doesn't have them already? What do we do?
Yeah, you can answer that, Milind. I will add.
No, I think as of now, there is no data to show that although theoretically the ACE2 receptor in the lungs being the receptor for uptake of the virus, that is a theoretical concern. As of now, there is no evidence to show that ACE inhibitors or ARBs, strong evidence, their treatment with them actually worsens outcomes in COVID. Because there is also a counter suggestion which says that they may attenuate the cytokine storm in COVID. It is far worse to withdraw antihypertensive therapy and subject the patient to more complications of accelerated hypertension on top of COVID. So in patients who are on therapy, currently the evidence doesn't suggest that you should stop the therapy. And patients should just be on guideline mandated therapy and monitoring of their BP goals. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is, what I agree totally with Milind. In fact, very early, the first month of the COVID pandemic, that controversy came, but subsequently all the guidelines have cleared that. As a matter of fact, there are now studies going on the in COVID use of these drugs for heart failure management, etc. In fact, the study data are favorable. It also tells us that the patient on RAS blocker like ACE inhibitor, ARB, their outcome is better with heart failure. As we know, COVID has got a lot of cardiac complications like myocarditis, that heart failure, etc. So it is useful in those patients. So therefore, I don't think there is any reason for us to worry about it. Though the very first month of the pandemic, that particular, the worry came, but now following beyond that, all the guideline tells us. Only point is, possibly if a young patient is there, who has, firstly or a newly diagnosed hypertension, today we have got the other drugs also to initiate if one is scared about using these drugs, because the very early data said possibly we can replace with the CCB or newer beta blocker. But as on now, whatever as Milind rightly said, that ACE2 affecting, that SARS-CoV-2, the CO2, the virus, the replication has been, reputed, and there is no fear of, using these drugs in hypertension. Yeah.
So one more question which has been asked is, how would you treat isolated systolic hypertension, and in these patients, what would be, if at all, you have to use the calcium?
This is always a difficult field, in hypertension management, because as we know, most of the time when we reduce the systolic blood pressure, even the diastolic blood pressure also reduces. But therefore, elderly people with an high systolic pressure and the lowering of the diastole less than 90, wide pulse pressure, the drugs what we normally recommend is like, CCB and, the small dose of diuretic like drug, So maybe, drug like, small dose of indapamide or a chlorthalidone, or maybe the newer CCB now available, which are long acting, is a better way of this. So either, you can use depending upon the staging of isolated systolic hypertension. Like I mentioned, when the systolic is 140 to 159, we say the stage 1. If it is more than 160 to nearly 179, we take it as a stage 2. Whereas the diastolic is less than 90 in both the stages. So we can use, like either CCB or, the diuretic singly, or if it is not still come under control, we can use the combination of both these, the small dose of diuretic and CCB. In fact, there are studies in the elderly people where, using these drugs, the stroke benefit and the benefit in, the other, clinical condition have been shown. But only thing we have to be always, we have to be cautious that, when you are reducing the systolic, diastolic, we have to be a little bit, like therefore building up the dose gradually, that particularly patient who has got an advanced coronary artery disease, because who is, depending upon the diastolic filling of the coronary artery, can get into the problem. But it has been always, said that these are more into theoretical. Whenever I have interacted with many international experts, they say at any age, systolic blood pressure is the brunt for cardiovascular system. And the diastolic, what we scare, is not a major issue. What they say, that get the systolic blood pressure down, then the cardiovascular outcome is better. And whatever the diastolic, going down is more into theoretically, but in a very advanced coronary artery disease, we may be little, borderline. We will have to make a little compromise that you go a little slow and gradually you can. You have to add anything, Milind, in that? Any pointer?
Just 2
It should
points.
be okay.
I would just like to re-emphasize what you said, that the systolic blood pressure in elderly is very important. And the 3 major trials on the basis of which today we say you should reduce the blood pressure. That is your SystUre, HiVet, and your SHEP. All of them had the inclusion criteria as systolic hypertension. None of them had diastolic hypertension as a recruitment criteria. And in all of them, the net blood pressure reduction was below 150 millimeters. So, so definitely reducing the systolic blood pressure in the elderly helps. As recently as 2 decades ago, it used to be said that this is a form of essential hypertension. It is required to propel the blood through the sclerosed artery of the elderly. But we do not believe that at all anymore. But having said that, a couple of points of caution. I would be a little cautious once the diastolic blood pressure starts going below 65. Because then the patients become a little more prone to orthostatic hypotension and these kind of things. So in an elderly patient, the baseline visit, I would always first look upfront for orthostatic hypotension. And in subsequent visits, once the systolic blood pressure starts going below 130 or 120 and the patient starts complaining of things like giddiness or a little bit of blackouts, always watch out for orthostatic hypotension. It's very common. And the last thing is key in the elderly, when you're using diuretics, start at a little lower dose than what you use in the younger people. Because again, orthostatic symptoms and hyponatremia are much more common in the elderly because their kidneys are not able to handle sodium very well. So apart from that, the treatment is as is guideline recommended with these few caveats.
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So one more. So the next question is similar. How do you treat isolated diastolic hypertension? So I think maybe in short, so you could
Yeah, basically, it's a good point, a good question. Basically, young people, like we say, predominantly diastolic hypertension. How we said elderly are predominantly systolic, the isolated systolic. And in between that age group, rough cutoff, what guideline tells us most of the, the books mention, less than 40 is generally, like a diastolic, more than 60, they're given as isolated systolic, and between 40 to 60, combined systolic and diastolic. So basically, here we are going by the vascular resistance, like a peripheral vascular resistance is the reason for, the diastolic, and we know the cardiac output is predominantly for the isolated systolic. So, drug like, whatever we are using, standard like CCB, even the drug like, the RAS blocker, ACE inhibitor, ARB, even the newer beta blocker. Remember what we think, beta blocker don't reduce vascular resistance is not true. Like a drug like Nebivolol, which is a newer drug, they do because of the nitric oxide donor property, they reduce the vascular resistance. So in fact, that is why I was mentioning the beta blocker, particularly the newer one like Nebivolol, is a big, the game changer for us today because it has got a multiple property. In fact, one of the things is reducing the vascular resistance, nitric oxide donor. It also has got, the central aortic pressure, like, unlike the other beta blocker. Therefore, even we are placed to use even in elderly hypertension, plus, all the other, like, comorbid, like, maybe arrhythmia, maybe atrial fibrillation, maybe angina, etc. And in young hypertensive, to me, it is one of the important drug because heart rate also we have to control because today heart rate is considered one of the risk factor. And the India Heart study, as I mentioned during my talk, has clearly shown that in Indians, the resting heart rate is normally 80 plus. And a hypertensive individual, if they get the blood pressure, get the heart rate less than 70, it is ideal. So therefore, I feel vascular resistance, diastolic predominantly hypertension, treat drugs which affect the vascular resistance, like, RAS blocker, CCB, or maybe newer beta blocker. And, even the diuretic for that matter has got also a little bit. So we need not have to worry much. Essentially, when it comes to the therapy of, diastolic or isolated systolic or a combined, it is, like a strategy for us to see how we are controlling gradual and slowly build up the dose, as Milind rightly mentioned, that, elderly people see that metabolic effect. So also in young people, suddenly that whatever white coat hypertension we have to rule out, etc. Just by the first reading, putting straight away on dual combination or a combo therapy, again, we have to be cautious. But having said that, I don't think, our, the major, the therapy is different. But one point I want to stress here again, because many times in young hypertension, when you check the blood pressure, systolic may be 130, but the diastolic is about 100, 95, etc. That means they are hypertensive, they are called diastolic hypertensive. If you are giving importance to only systolic, you are going to miss the diastolic hypertension. So it's very important that carefully measure diastolic blood pressure by the absence of Korotkov sounds. Don't just get, down. Once you get a systolic 120 or a 130, you don't take a diastolic. Don't do that error, because you can, you can diagnose diastolic, only provided you auscultate for the loss or the absence of the phase 5 or the Korotkov sound, because if you concentrate only on the systolic, then you may miss out on the diastolic. Yeah.
Yeah, very true, sir. What's the one question which is being asked again repeatedly is about resistant hypertension. So, can you just give a few tips as to what?
Basically, the resistant hypertension we normally say when you give a 3 drug, in the proper dose, whatever is recommended, and moreover, patient is taking. We have to see that patient is taking the blood pressure. In fact, one of the common thing, at least country like UK, they first suspect whether patient is taking the drug or not. In fact, during our last, the conference, Brian William, who is the chairman of NICE guidelines, says UK, there is a first thing they rule out whether patient is taking or not. They do the urinary level of these drugs first, and they rule out, because according to him, current drugs are so good, the resistance is very, very less. So therefore, here 3 drug, diuretic, RAS blocker, CCB, you are given an adequate dose, patient is taking. In spite of that, patient blood pressure doesn't come under control, then conventionally we call it as a resistant. But these were little, like a old terminology, In the later conferences and the guideline, it is mentioned that for a resistant hypertension, before really labeling as a resistant, use a small dose of MRA like spironolactone or use eplerenone as the aldosterone antagonist, because according to them, even in essential hypertension, there is a mild hyperaldosteronism. It is not exactly like a Cohn syndrome or a primary hyperaldosteronism. So they put as one of the things, like after 3 drug, put on an additional drug, like provided, creatinine, potassium, is okay for using these drugs. As we know, creatinine of 1.5, 1.6 and a potassium of 5.5 or so is probably a point where you should not use MRAs. But if there are no contraindication, use a small dose of aldosterone blocker. And if still the blood pressure doesn't come under control, then possibly you can label it as, probably patient is resistant to our therapy. And again, here I would like to say, if a patient young, then, beta blocker come high up, I don't think, because beta blocker we can disregard. As a matter of fact, European guideline is one, even today also, beta blocker is still, is put as one of the drug. And as I showed in all the guideline, all 5 drugs are, the starting drug, either singly or in combinations are mentioned. So if you are dealing with a young hypertensive, high renin hypertensive, unless you put on, drug which will have blunt the sympathic response. RAS blockers are not powerful sympathic blocker. They have a little bit, renin, the level, but they are not strong sympathy blocker like beta blocker. So you have a reason when you use all these drugs adequately, and if still blood pressure doesn't come under control, then you have to start investigating. Maybe, we are missing out, like maybe sleep apnea, maybe we are ruling, we have to rule out other causes, endocrine and things like that. So resistance basically today we diagnose or we start investigating, I would say, that after giving adequate 3 drug, maybe a small dose of aldosterone blocker, then I may investigate the patient further. I don't know how is your approach, Milind, whether you agree with this, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, adequate dose of 3 antihypertensives, conventional, and 3 with or without a beta blocker. And
Yeah.
then after that, we start investigating. And more often than not, it is a very good idea. I mean, we think that it should not be done. It's a very good idea to sit with the patient, ask them to get all their tablet strips and check them one by one. You'll be surprised so often to see how the compliance, the patient may just orally tell you, I am taking all the medications.
Right, yeah.
You'll suddenly notice that one medication which you have advised BID is being taken OD, or some old medication is being taken. The correct medicine is not being taken. So compliance in 20 to 30% of cases, either improper compliance or wrong compliance is the cause. Then 2 common medications, again, especially in elderly patients, a lot of them have a lot of joint problems, musculoskeletal problems. Many of them will be on NSAIDs. They will just pop NSAIDs from time to time, and they will say, hey, this doctor had given me this NSAID for some joint problem long time ago. So every week I take 2-3 tablets. Yeah. And you're wondering why the blood pressure is not coming under control. So or sometimes we have seen even patients take out old packets of steroid tablets. So they're taking 5 mg, 10 mg prednisolone per day for days together. And we are wondering why the BP is not coming under control. So these simple things before going to hi-fi investigations like renal artery Doppler and renin levels and, Cohn syndrome and all that, just think of the simple things first. And most often with adequate doses of medications and ruling out these simple things, most patients with resistant hypertension will tend to come under control.
I totally agree with Milind, whatever treatable cause, but at the same time, elderly people, so much of pain, they're suffering at times, you have to give them, some analgesic because there's so much, so quality of life suffers. But so basically you have to make a balance of things here. Okay, next one,
So one question again, which has been asked 2-3 times is, sir, about the digital versus the manual methods of recording the blood pressure. So do you have any suggestions or guidelines?
Basically now, the manual blood pressure, basically like, the one thing which we normally nowadays, because of the whatever physician induce, the sympathetic activity and the white coat, whenever we take the blood pressure, our healthcare worker, our assistant or nurses take the blood pressure, always, the error of, the additional rise in blood pressure of, the reading is always existing. automated blood pressure reading is always a better if you can take even in the clinic. As a matter of fact, most of us now, we take the automated reading in the clinic. In the sense, we are not, we doctors or maybe, the assistant tie the blood pressure and we get the reading. And after a few minutes, we come back and see the average of 3 reading, etc. And that is one of the easy way now, because most of the, the calibration of the current, automated BP measurements with all the, the societies, all the European and the British society, etc. are, validated machines are available, and that becomes a very easy, But if you don't have that, possibly there is a difference of 10 millimeters. Therefore, we basically, if you are measuring as against an automated or a home BP monitoring, say, then addition of 10, that is why that initial guideline 130, 140 as the starting blood pressure came, because of who is taking the blood pressure. Are you taking manually or are you taking automated thing comes in? But at the moment, I would recommend the automated one. But if it is not practical in a busy clinic, in a maybe a general physician, etc., or a family physician, taking the blood pressure, maybe the initial reading you can, you may not give importance. Subsequently, 2 reading at an interval of 5 minutes, and then averaging out and taking in sitting right hand, the taking properly. But we have to spend time in taking blood pressure. That is very important, BP taking, at least in my clinic, as the last thing what I do, after taking the thorough history, after examination, then we take the blood pressure, the last reading. By that time, patient becomes, calm and collect in the office, etc. But BP measurement, we have to confirm, as I mentioned during my talk, moment you have some doubt about the white coat, do the automated, but make a right diagnosis. Or maybe home BP monitoring also is a reasonable, like, doing at home 7 days, reading morning and night, about 14 reading, and then averaging out is a good method, because you can rule out many things, and even you can diagnose mask hypertension to some extent, which is not possible in the clinic or by even the automated clinic. So I think, we must remember one thing: taking standard blood pressure in the clinic, either manual or automated, is the standard. You should not miss out on that. However, with that, we have to use additional tool like manual at home, that is, home BP monitoring, and ambulatory selectively. So everything is complementary to one another. You should not say that I go only by ambulatory, I don't do it. Is not like that. And you can't go on doing ambulatory BP all the time. So even you have started therapy today, after few months, when patient come for follow-up, you have to follow up the patient by hour reading or automated BP machine. You are not going to do the ambulatory again. Ambulatory BP monitoring you can't do every now and then. So home BP monitoring may be easy to follow. So ultimately the treatment and how is the adherence to therapy, we have to go by the simple method. And the simple method is office, either your own or maybe the automated. Because by that time, once you have an initiated treatment, patient comes for follow-up. Most of the patients now are quite in your office. They are quite tuned to the atmosphere. If at all you are in doubt even there, you do the automated BP reading in your clinic. And just for the practical reason, you take one BP automated reading and one your own self, and you see the difference. An individual where too much of difference is there, you can make out possibly the white coat effect in that individual is different, because there is white coat effect in an individual of hypertensive. So basically that all will give you a little idea about how to go about it. Basically it is all for therapy. We must remember that hypertension diagnosis should be correct. That is the main thing. Agree, Milind? You have to add anything there?
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to emphasize that when sir says it is automatic BP at the clinic, it is necessarily by definition, as per the trials, it is automatic unsupervised BP.
Yeah.
For example, if you look at the SPRINT trial, what they did is they put the patient in the doctor's office, they tied the cuff, and the attendant who was taking the blood pressure just walked out. And the cuff took readings when the patient was alone in the room. So that will give a blood pressure which is 10 millimeters less than your usual office readings when you are taking it with the patient. When the SPRINT trial says the blood pressure was less than 120 by 80, that means in your office, your practical measurement is actually less than 130 by 80.
Yeah.
So,
So
you know,
that,
most of us can't do that in the clinic unattended. So if you're using an attended value, when you are sitting with the patient, then use a value of 130, add 10 to it.
yeah, right. This is
Otherwise, then you
important.
will end up, you know, trying to reduce the blood pressure much more.
Yeah, so this is an important take-home message for people who are not, don't want too much of a automated and all those things. Take, your 10, the 10 as a additional value to the automated. Like if I automated 130 BP is taken as a cutoff, your BP should be 140 by manual method, by your own. So that 10 millimeter of blood pressure is taken as the effect due to your reading. Your reading means that sympathetic activity, sympathetic overactivity, or the white coat effect. Yeah.
And sir, some questions are coming on the best treatment of hypertension in chronic kidney disease.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, once the creatinine starts really going beyond to your choice of antihypertensives is restricted. But you can definitely use some of your calcium channel blockers in younger patients, beta blockers. And then your conventional diuretics may not work as your creatinine starts going higher and higher. So you may have to rely on loop diuretics. So normally you don't think of loop diuretics as antihypertensive agents. But considering the fact that there is so much fluid overload in the CKD patients and that the nephrons are resistant to your other diuretics, sometimes the first diuretics to add in these patients may be loop diuretics and at a dose which may be much higher than what you use in, in your normal patients. You may not be accustomed to be using 40 or 80 mg Lasix for hypertension, but CKD patients may require higher doses of loop diuretics. And then some of the other medications like, which you don't conventionally use as first line medications like prazosin or maybe clonidine or some of the thiazide-like diuretics. So these are some of the medications which may also come into play. So,
I totally agree because, CKD is one situation we are always difficult to control blood pressure. And sometimes along with the loop diuretics, we use metalazone because, particularly with the renal dysfunction. And then as, Milind rightly said, like, moxidine is one drug, like, the CCB, then, these are the few drug combination we have to use. And it is a little difficult area. I totally agree with Milind because, we get into a situation where rising creatinine will come in the way of using RAS blocker, will come in the way of the MRA, like, the spironolactone, epilinone. So it becomes a little difficult area. I agree with it. But roughly, when the creatinine goes beyond 1.5, 1.6, that means the GFR goes down less than 50, that is a time when, the thiazide diuretic, thiazide like chlorthalidone, indapamide doesn't work much. So we have to use loop diuretic and loop diuretic with a metalazone and drug like, CCB, drug like beta blocker, like nebivolol, even metoprolol can be used with a renal dysfunction. Moxidine can be used, and RAS blocker we have to be carefully using because creatinine goes up more than 25% from the basal value, we will be cautious. But if it remains steady, then there is an indication to continue that. But then, basically we have to basically depend upon biochemical estimation of like creatinine, electrolyte regularly on these patients rather than just by clinical parameter because we have no method to diagnose hyperkalemia or creatinine going up after starting this therapy. So it's a little difficult area, So CKD is one area, is the most difficult area. And normally these type patient, particularly high blood pressure patients, the CKD, they'll end up with 4 or 5 drugs. In spite of that, they don't get into what we really want at 130, 80 or 140, 90. It's always a difficult situation. Yeah. Okay. Next one.
absolutely. So we have time or are we out of time?
We have some time.
We still have time, sir.
Yeah, we can have some 5-10 minutes we can discuss or more. Let's see, we're just getting 8. So we can have 5-10 minutes. It's okay.
In the Q&A session, there are questions, sir.
Yeah, we can go on. Yeah.
No, there is one question because this is, this is something which we must emphasize once and for all. So the question is, when using a single drug, should we go up to the maximum dose or should we add a low dose second drug? So I think, sir, this needs to be clarified.
This is, very, very important. I think we should never go to the maximum dose, at least in the current time, because, we have to use something like a medium dose rather than like, very high dose of a particular drug because the effect is not additive. It is all common for most of the drugs. This is Not only hypertension, I'm saying, even the lipid, diabetes, all these, lifestyle diseases, we don't go to the maximum dose. What dose recommended in the trial to whatever maximum, I may go to the 50% of the dose recommendation, and then I may add another drug because I want multiple drugs in like average dose for the synergistic effect. The drugs which are affecting at a different level, that are they reducing cardiac output, are they reducing vascular resistance, are they reducing the sympathetic activity, etc. So when I'm giving a drug for hypertension, I am using like a average dose of not the maximum dose of one drug, but a multiple drug in a combination, something like a medium, something where in the middle range, not in a very high like that. And because I want to have the positive, this you must remember, there is no role for step-up approach, what is called the step-up approach or a step care approach. There is no approach today. We can straight away start on like a double combination upfront if you want the blood pressure reduction by 20/10. I did mention in my talk, say for example, if you got a blood pressure 160/100 and you want to get the blood pressure 140/90 or so, and you have established the diagnosis 160/100 correct, it is not a white coat. You have ruled out white coat and is an established hypertension, and you have to get down the systolic by 20 and diastolic by 10, you have got a reason to start dual combination straight away. And so we should not have that step approach, particularly when you got a very high blood pressure. Because if the blood pressure is very high to start with, we no more use that step care approach. As a matter of fact, step care approach is not valid currently, and we have to use the drug combination in a medium dose one drug rather than going maximum, because you are inviting one side effect of a drug, and you won't affect, it won't affect the double effect of what, say, for example, if CCB 5 milligram versus 10 milligram of the same drug, it is not the double the effect. It will a little marginal thing. This is what we see in most of the drugs. Most of the drug, even for diabetes, it is also valid for lipid. And higher the level initial of blood pressure, the effect may be better in a particular dose. So it is very clear we are not going anywhere a step care approach. Milind, do you have to add anything in this particular area?
Same thing. I mean, we want optimal dose of the drug at which side effects are not going to occur, but it's going to be most efficacious. Beyond, we should add a second drug.
Yeah.
So the drug should synergize with each other and should minimize the side effects of each other. So don't step.
And luckily for us in India, we have to really envy our pharma, the pharma industry. I must say, I want to really compliment them, because we get all combination in all various dosage in very short time we get, because this is one of the things which I want to mention, because when you're talking about Indian guideline, Indian patient, we have to approach in a different fashion than the Western guideline, because there's a lot of reservation of medicine in Western country. Like for example, clothianidone and indapamide hardly available in US, and in UK also hardly available, and they are going into thiazide like a bendofluoride. And if you look at again in a European situation, these drugs are not easily available, and they will put guideline what is available to them, unlike in India. And that is what I mentioned during my talk. When you're talking about diuretic for us in India, today clothianidone 6.25, 12.5 in a small dose, in a combination, double, triple is easily available. Or indapamide 1.5 or a 2.5, 1.25 milligram is easily available, single and in combination. So we have to use synergistic combination in the early stage of disease rather than going into step care approach. We should not fall into that step care. You start this therapy or wait for some more time and then this like that, Yeah.
And when you choose an antihypertensive agent, first always think of the so-called compelling indications,
Compelling indication always is important. We have to also, as Milind rightly mentioned, look into the clinical characteristic of the patient. It is not like, like when you go to buy a sweet in a sweet shop, there are, 100 varieties, but we pick up one, which you think, you like that, or you feel this suits me or something like that. So also, it is not, giving any drug for an individual. It all goes by the clinical characteristic of an individual, and what are the compelling indication for that individual, what is the age of patient, what is patient's resting heart rate. Remember, resting heart rate in hypertension is an important thing in 2020 we have to respect. And that is what India Heart Study has clearly shown. Such a large epidemiological study, 20,000 patients nearly, you won't get anything anywhere in the world. So that again, epidemiological data we have to use in our real world patients. So resting heart rate to control, using never beta blocker in our practice, and using the right drug depending upon the compelling indication, whether this patient has angina, arrhythmia, heart failure, and things like that. And what stage of hypertension you are using again is very, very important. Important to remember, we have to pick up hypertension early. So we have to create an awareness. In fact, now recently hypertension awareness world symbol is, inaugurated recently by Glenmark Pharma. And, it is a symbol of a BP awareness creation. And that is already making a big impact all over the world. And this is the launch of awareness symbol by Indian Pharma. And this has been now, the accepted as a symbol at the international level. So we have to create awareness. We have to create, the diagnosis of hypertension, young age particularly. Young age where we miss. And if blood pressure remains for 10 years and we detect blood pressure 10 years later, all the cumulative effect of blood pressure taken place, because we see young people with a coronary artery disease, young people come with a stroke, etc. And one of the method how I create, awareness and how I make, hypertension treatment like adherence to the therapy, I always, inform the patient, look here, if you don't take treatment for hypertension, you will get a stroke, you will get a paralysis. And that one particular, the morbidity, no one would like to have. So in my preventive clinic over the years, one particular point I highlight in a preventive clinic is to stress upon why BP, even if it is asymptomatic, we have to control, is to prevent stroke, prevent paralysis. And that particular thing is very, easy way of convincing patient. That is my one of personal experience to give to all the people, that talk to patient properly, because hypertension is asymptomatic. By the time they get symptoms, it is a complicated. Remember, hypertension is a silent disease. Diabetes is a silent disease. Lipid is a silent disease. It moment you have a symptom means it's already complicated. The patient gets a giddiness, blurring of vision, headache. That means the hypertensive complication has set in. It is not just a simple hypertension. And in 2020, we as physicians, if we have to pick up hypertension in the early stage, the only way is creating awareness. And if you have to create adherence to the therapy, it is, by our, the explaining the patient simple method, why we have to adhere to the therapy is important, and also to give medicine, which are, without any side effect. It's like almost like a placebo-like side effect. Many times, our hypertensive patient, after starting therapy, are miserable because our selection of the drug may not be correct for him and it discontinues. That should not happen. And therefore, we have to again see patient characteristic, and we have to see that, whatever his problems you have to address, because the hypertension is asymptomatic. If you give symptoms due to the drugs, then his adherence will suffer. So this is again very, very important for the physicians to spend time in patient, the education. Yeah, Melin, yeah. Maybe pregnancy hypertension, you want to talk a little bit on pregnancy to the people, Melin, because that's one practical thing. Many, family physician or maybe many obstetrician gynecologists maybe might have hooked into our webinar, how hypertension in pregnancy we manage,
Yeah, so as many of the participants will be aware, hypertension in pregnancy can be of various types. One is the classical pregnancy-induced hypertension, where hypertension comes typically in the second trimester. It is not present prior to pregnancy. But apart from that, there can be essential hypertension which just continues into pregnancy. or there can be hypertension of early onset in pregnancy. It's very important to document what hypertension you're dealing with. For example, if you have a patient who's already had hypertension and the patient now wants to get pregnant, so it's important to know what medications the patient will be on, because many patients will conceive, and if they are on ACE inhibitors or ARBs, which are considered an absolute contraindication during the time of organogenesis, they would be a little worried. So if a patient of hypertension comes to you planning for a pregnancy, probably you would like to switch over these patients onto medications which are absolutely pregnancy safe. Similarly, patients with pregnancy who come to you now with established high elevated blood pressure, you should look for, again, secondary causes and things like that. But if the blood pressure is of new onset, most likely it is related to pregnancy-induced hypertension. And medicines which we use, ACE inhibitors and ARBs are not used. Among the beta blockers, we don't use the conventional beta blockers as the first choice because they can cause certain fetal and maternal effects, but we use the agent labetalol. So labetalol is one of the medications of choice in pregnancy-induced hypertension. Second medication that we use is, instead of, again, conventional calcium channel blockers, we use long-acting Nicardia. So long-acting nifedipine. So that labetalol and long-acting nifedipine are probably the frontline drugs. Once upon a time, it used to be alpha-methyl-dopa, but alpha-methyl-dopa, there are a lot of availability issues. If you can get it, it is a good medication to use. It is often not available.
Yeah.
And sometimes in some patients, we may use medications like clonidine if all these don't work.
Yeah.
By and large, and remember that the doses, again, you may have to go up to slightly higher doses, and you may have to go up to doses as much as 40 to 60 mg per day of long-acting nifedipine, and you may have to go up to doses of 300 or 400 mg per day of labetalol. These medications, my practical observation is that these medications don't have the efficacy in lowering blood pressure of our conventional BP medications. So most of the times you either have to use them in high doses or combine. So don't be afraid of combining these medications and to achieve your BP target. But on the other hand, if nothing works, then you may have to use some of your more conventional medications. So within these caveats, maybe cautiously adding a small dose of amlodipine or cautiously adding a small dose of a drug like metoprolol sometimes may be acceptable, especially if you are in the the third trimester, and you can closely monitor the patient. And of course, when the patient comes very late, then with something like eclampsia or those kind of complications, then it's no longer a question of antihypertensive therapy, and it's a pregnancy that has to be terminated. And in many of the patients who have pregnancy-induced hypertension, within a few weeks after delivery, it will go away. And many of these patients will not develop hypertension again. But in a small minority, hypertension comes back after 2 or 3 years. So there is a tendency for some of these patients to develop hypertension in the future. So you should also monitor for that. Maybe ask the patient to check their blood pressure in 6 months or 12 months time or something like that. So this,
little bit about that's okay. I think you covered little bit about emergency and because there is one question, sir. Just you can address on that. When you say as hypertension emergency in one, like urgency like that, just you give few minutes because one thing came in chat. I think
yeah, there are a lot of questions on that. So
yeah, I think good. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, if you look at there is a very good document recently on exclusively on hypertensive emergencies and urgencies, and everybody is saying that you should now abandon the term hypertensive urgencies. Genuine emergencies are the ones in which there is ongoing risk or ongoing target organ damage, like for example, hypertensive heart failure or an intracranial hemorrhage or something like a hemolytic uremic syndrome like picture. So these are the conditions which are genuine hypertensive emergency. Just because a patient walks into your clinic or to the hospital with a BP of 190 by 110, don't treat it as an hypertensive emergency and start IV medications and reduce the blood pressure, because you may do more harm than good. Many of these patients who are relatively stable, who don't have ongoing target organ damage, you can use conventional oral agents in combination therapy to reduce their blood pressure and closely monitor their parameters. Maybe a short admission and then discharge. Now for the genuine emergencies where you really have to reduce the blood pressure, it depends upon what end organ is affected. The common thing that you will see is hypertensive heart failure. So the so-called heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So the patient comes with a blood pressure of 200 by 120 and is in gross left heart failure. So these patients have a normal ejection fraction. So this is all diastolic dysfunction and diastolic heart failure related symptoms. So for these patients, diuretics, Lasix or furosemide or your torsemide are the agents of choice. So the aim is to immediately decongest the lungs, and eventually you add an afterload reducer. Like most commonly the agent uses nitroglycerin. For other patients, again, there are 2 or 3 drugs which are most commonly used and which you should know. One is nitroglycerin, the other is Lasix, the third is labetalol, or something even like esmolol. So labetalol is a medication which is, which has a broad spectrum of application in a lot of hypertensive emergencies, especially pregnancy-related hypertension or hypertension which is not associated with LV dysfunction. And we don't use IV labetalol, but it is a very useful agent and it is a good agent to have in your therapeutic armamentarium. In coronary artery disease or in patients who present with florid heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, but who have a high BP, again, nitroglycerin is very good. So it has some afterload reduction, some preload reduction as well. And the other thing is, don't be very aggressive in your initial BP reduction. So the patient comes with a BP of 220 by 140. Don't aim to reduce it to 140 by 80 in the first, 6 hours or so. Just about a 20% reduction of baseline within the first 24 hours, and more often than not, then you will be able to overlap your oral medications with the IV medications and let your oral medications take over. So oral medication, IV meds are only for an initial reduction to maybe about say 170 or 180. From then on, we have to let the oral medications take over, exception being, of course, gross heart failure and ischemia. So if you have ongoing coronary ischemia, and if you have a patient in pulmonary edema along with that, then you would like to reduce the systolic blood pressure to about 110 or 120 with nitroglycerin. Other than that, very aggressive reduction of blood pressure in emergencies is not recommended.
The terminology malignant hypertension, let it clarify, because one question came as a malignant hypertension.
Yeah, so see, malignant hypertension, we don't see much. When this terminology came up in the 1920s, when it was first appreciated, it was realized that these patients come often with exudates in the retina, end organ damage, and these are like patients who have not been treated at all for hypertension. There were no antihypertensive medications at that time. Patients directly used to come with these kind of things, and the prognosis of these patients was as bad as patients with malignancies. And so therefore, the term used was malignant hypertension. Luckily, we don't see too many patients of that sort. Most of the patients that we see are, hypertensive emergencies of the kind we described. So you have to treat them, initially stabilize the patient, treat the end organ damage, treat the precipitating factors, reduce the blood pressure to reasonable levels, and then select appropriate oral medications to overlap with the IV medications, and then get the patient onto oral medications. I think, sir, that should be the approach.
I think